Hey everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Fight Chat Friday from TKD Coach Academy. This week we're continuing in our series looking at the last European Championships in Lucia in Spain, and we're going to have a look at the minus 56 kilo senior female division and the path to victory for Sam Delrock. So stay with us if you'd like to have a look through that.
Everybody, welcome back to Fight Chat Friday. So this Friday came around pretty quick again. So the videos are flying out now as it is. So excited to have a look at another one. Really enjoyed last week's one. If you haven't checked that out, go have a look. It was having a look at the minus 70 senior male division. So today we're going to have a look at the 56, as Adrian said. Switching to the female side of things. And this is a good division with some really high level female competitors. So it'll be interesting to have a look at this one. Last week as well, we had a little bit of a kind of an overview of maybe some minus points in refereeing, which was a topical debate amongst people from the Euros. So let's have a look as well at a few of the kind of minus points and some talking points from the 56 division. So we'll probably kick off with that first, and then we'll get stuck into the final for Sam, coming through 4 fights to take the gold medal. So maybe first off, let's get stuck into some of the minus points, and let's have a bit of a discussion on that. What do we think, and where can we go from there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose the main things that we're looking at when we go through these are, look, what is the application of the rule? What is the consistency of that? And, you know, today, where previously we were talking a little bit about contact, I think most of today's fouls are actually for holding. So, you know, it's quite a severe penalty, and just to kind of get people's brain set into the mode of it, I think when I would look at holding, or when that came in as a foul, the idea is it was almost working like obstruction in football or in rugby, where you're denying your opponent the opportunity to score. So it's like how you might get a yellow or red card, depending on the sport, for denying the opportunity to score. But some of them that have come up have been quite soft. So let's have a look at some of these. And we'll kick off with, I think our first one was actually from the second round here. And this is looking at the match versus Sweden. And this is a nice simple one, where I think this first one we were looking at contact.
Yeah, so it's like when they get to the hands, it's a bit scrappy, but then Sam comes through and actually gets a nice little purchase on it, on that exchange. And I just think that the angle she took meant that Sweden wasn't really ready. And I think, it's an interesting one, but do you think that's going to be more contact or holding?
No, for me, this one is contact. I don't think we've gotten to a holding. Like, this one seems to be a very straightforward one, where yes, it's contact. Do I think that's excessive contact? No, but you know, is that what that's for? Yes, I think so. Yeah,
I think like this is just a case of she pulled a very nice angle and her opponent wasn't ready. So I think if anything, like, the fault lies with Sweden in this one, you know. And I think this is kind of a similar one as well in terms of the idea behind it. So
well, it was just that this second one, then there was no foul. So, you know, we're just looking at, is there a substantial difference in the level of contact when we look at this next exchange?
Yeah, it's very similar.
I think what you've got is continuity in the first one versus, you know, a single, you know, a number of single shots in the second one. I don't know that they were necessarily that much harder.
Yeah. I wonder, is the intention here for the referees to maybe calm down the situation, or to keep one person safe who maybe received a lot of contact? So it's like, what's kind of the thinking here? Because, like, it's not really a big problem as such, especially the first one for me. It's like Sam got through, pulled a nice angle and got an advantage. And like, we're talking a lot, we'll see it today as well, that when both people begin to punch, usually there's no clear distinction, and it's just kind of cancelled out by the referees. So then when somebody does get that little upper hand, it's interesting that it's almost cancelled out then by a minus point, because they're actually doing the thing that you want them to do by getting kind of like a clear distinction that they got the contact.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, in this case, we've moved into the area of holding, I think. Obviously, we don't know from the referee signal what the reason for it is, but it looks to me like Sam has gotten the hands over the shoulder there, and it's ended up with holding. But we get this so often where, you know, unless there's you know, you're having to make the determination, I think, that Sam is actually restraining Lucia from moving there. And
Yeah.
it's one of those ones where, look, yeah, that could be fair. We can't actually see what our hands are doing on the other side of the fighter. But, you know, sometimes those holding ones come across very, very soft indeed in terms of like the... and you know, this pushing forward, you can see the hands are in a very, very similar position. In this case, it's just a warning for Sweden. So that's the challenge in terms of the consistency of application. And for me, a big thing is, because you have both of those constituting fouls, the holding, and you can see here where, yeah, Sweden has the left arm around. Maybe that's the key moment here. But when holding like that can be a foul and contact can be a foul, you can very quickly end up in this like 2-foul situation where you're having to have somebody from the tournament committee watching. This one's very, very, very soft. Just the last one here with Italy, very, very, very soft. I don't think there's been a chance to actually do anything, or, you know, I think the referee's been way too quick to call this holding.
Well, I think this one, if you go back to the original point that we made, is that this was brought in to keep the flow of the match going. If anything, Italy here is trying to keep the flow going by continuing to... She was just too slow, and just Sam caught her on the hop, and then she tried to wiggle herself out of it and get back into contact, and then she was penalised for it. So I'm not really sure. This one, for me, is probably the only one that you could really...
You're 100% sure.
Say is, yeah, like she's grabbing her on the back of the head. Yeah. Again, like it's soft when you look at the grand scheme of contact in combat sports, but in terms of the rules, yeah, I think that this is the one that's most clear.
Yeah, and I think like the understanding that we have to have around holding is, I think when we look at what the rule says versus what the intent of the rule is, like there's a lot of things can be counted as holding, and we've seen in some of the other fights that we looked at where, you know, sweeping the leg out of the way, if there's any little bit of a carry on that at all, can be called holding, because again, there's that, you know, are you gaining advantage? You know, you can have holding where the intent is to bump or move your opponent's, you know, body. So maybe you know, it's almost like that underhook situation where you get the, you know, your left hand under to move your opponent to the right or something like that, and you might get an advantage out of that. But I think it almost needs that interpretation that you'd have in terms of, you know, the obstruction one from football, where, you know, it's like, well, there's doing something and then there's doing something and getting the advantage. So I think if an advantage doesn't develop, it's just something clumsy. You know, where that could be a warning, you know, and look, you did something, it was a bit clumsy, it could be a warning. Whereas when you do something and gain a clear advantage, like, you have definitely stopped your opponent from scoring or from developing the situation. And I think where we thought holding was going to apply most was when the person came to hands and the other person ducked and grabbed, you know, to, like, because that was a thing that used to happen before, because it led to a warning, and a warning as opposed to getting scored on is a great trade. Yeah. But a foul is a whole other thing, because it's not just the minus point, it's the fact that you are now one step closer to being disqualified. And we saw quite a few disqualifications on the back of maybe one or two holding fouls, which can be very, very soft and purely incidental because of how the contact happened, like with our Italian there in the final, versus something that's like, okay, we might not agree with the level of contact that's being penalised, you know, certainly in most cases I wouldn't, but it's kind of clear that you did something. You didn't end up in a situation where you hit the person too hard, you swung the punch, or you know, whatever. So there's at least a certain amount of agency. You did that, whereas with some of the holding ones, it can just be awkward. Like, you can have the, you know, the kick comes out and lands against your guard, and because you're moving backwards, the kick stays on the guard, and a referee could very quickly say, oh well, that's holding. But if you got no advantage out of it, you know, is it the same thing at all? And from ring to ring, you might just see that, like, oh, nothing happened, carry on.
So would you like to see maybe like another variation of like something between a foul and a warning for something that's not kind of like, I don't know, like that's detrimental, let's say, like the likes of holding versus like absolutely smashing somebody with contact? Or would you like to see the rule of how it's described for holding change?
Yeah, so like for me, I think holding is a valid one. Like, I think it should be called obstruction rather than holding. I think there's you know, something, maybe take away the concept of holding, you know, but because I think the idea is why holding is a problem. There's two ways. There's one which is kind of the pulling the leg or doing something like that to gain an advantage, and then there's the issue of like you're trying to deny your opponent to score. And And I think there's an element of, well, do you gain advantage from it as well, like we've said before. For me, I actually think we should have less warnings in general. That's
Okay.
one of the things.
I agree.
I think we should, there should be maybe less warnings in general. But what I actually think we should have after that is almost like, yeah, you have your minus points, but your minus points are for, if it's for something like holding, cool, okay, we have that.
But not in disqualification.
But no, I think there should be like a yellow card, red card system for that.
Yeah.
To where it's like, okay, there's the automatic red card for the unsportsmanlike conduct in terms of like, the biting, gouging, elbows, dangerous stuff, abusive language, all that stuff. That's just straight red. It's very straightforward. You've got the T39 one, which is, okay, you've knocked somebody out, you've done something like that, okay, that's another one. But then you have the yellow, red, or whatever it would happen to be for contact. And like, I think that would allow a little bit of contact back in there, because people could play, and there could be some contact fouls and the game can still continue. I'd still like to see a lot less of that, but I think we've got a situation where before we weren't seeing anywhere near as many disqualifications until holding became a foul, and once holding became a foul, all of a sudden it's like it escalates quickly, and you'd almost need more like tournament committee members or umpire committee members to be standing at all the rings ready to go because of the amounts of fouls that are there, ready to disqualify people. It's just not great. But we did have some great matches on the way through that weren't completely spoiled by the fouls, and that's one of the things we'd say from Sam's ones here. I don't think the fouls spoiled any of the matches completely, so that's something. And her first round then was quite a battle with Lucija Regvat from Slovenia. So, I think one of the things that's fair to say with Sam, she started with very positive intent in all of her 4 matches.
All matches. Yeah. I think she, like, once we get into it as well, she kind of gets caught a little bit jumping in. So see that little jump there?
Yeah.
I think that she kind of quickly adapts and realizes, okay, I need to go a bit more direct. But Sam is actually very, very effective off the front leg, but I think she just favors hands a little more. So she kind of uses her leg to kind of fence and control distance. But,
to neutralise
really
what her opponent is doing, more so than carry her into scores.
Yeah, but she does like hands. But I think she probably will get a better return on hands in the Wacko system. But here she kind of, as we kind of looked at in some of the minus points, gets very close, and it's very hard to get that shot off then if you don't get the very first one. So we can see throughout her fights as she goes through, she's very good at getting that very first score, like here even, possibly landing that. But then the shots after that are very, very tight and very close. This one as well is interesting. What do you think here, Adrian, for Slovenia? Is this a score? Because does she land it? Does she land on the floor before?
For me, yes, because like what I'm looking at is at this point she has balance. She's got both feet on the ground. So even if she falls after that, for me that's the score. I think what happens is she gets both feet to the ground. She's not in perfect balance, and she realizes Sam is coming through, and then goes, "Whoops, I'll take a knee." I don't think she falls. I think she kind of goes, "All right, down is the way to go from here." And look, that's fair enough. But I do think the kick itself would be or should be a score.
Yeah, I think but you know what, that we're talking about refereeing and stuff here. We have to give him credit as well, because that's very hard to call.
Oh, absolutely.
In the split second, it's like, oh, was that a score? Was it not? So. Yeah, like they do have a tough job.
Yeah, certainly. And I think from people on the outside, they don't sometimes the scores can come up a little later on the scoreboard, and like that's part of the technology part of it, of how that's relayed. But it's also the referees can take a moment and see, is a warning given for loss of balance, and they can wait and look at that before giving the score on their scorecard. So sometimes it takes a couple of seconds after the action for the scores to register.
That last one there was one of the moments that Sam actually got a nice return off the continuation of hands. So she got the hands and actually found a way out with the turning kick to the body. So that was actually a nice adjustment she made. And like watching through all of her fights, that's one thing I'm very, very impressed with is how she adapts to how something happened in the previous exchange. And it's probably subconscious, but like the way that she adapts, if something doesn't work well and she didn't get a good return, she adapts really quick. Even this one here, where you see she gets pushed out, she quickly adjusted and put herself on the front foot again. So I think that's one of the hallmarks of her style and why she's a champion.
And yeah, I mean, we've discussed this in previous videos about the win mentality of the what's important now or what is next. Yeah, and I mean, I think that's something that when you watch it in practice, that's exactly it. It's like, okay, I did something, it didn't work out. Okay, what's the next important thing I need to do? How do I change this for the next interaction? And I think she does that very, very well. She doesn't look like she gets phased, ramped up or down. Like, she goes behind in some cases, and she reacts very much the same way as when she's gotten a score and gone in front. She kind of flicks the eyes to the scoreboard and goes, okay, this is what I need to do now. And she's very methodical in terms of, okay, I need to find a rhythm, find a distance that lets me engage the hands, or that lets me get past my opponent's threat, whatever that happens to be. And she adjusts and changes that per opponent, and picks, a strategy to get into contact that, that is appropriate for each opponent.
Yeah, definitely. Like, we seen, she was kind of cruising there towards the end and trying some fancy stuff and tricks and stuff, and she didn't get a return, fell over, and then straight away switched and got back to work. So it's like she doesn't kind of like rest on the previous exchange. She's like, okay, as you said, what do I need to do now? And she gets on her bike and gets back to work very quickly, which is a very important thing to have. As we said, in the short round of 2 rounds of 2 minutes, one exchange can be the difference. So you got to be focused the whole time.
Yeah, there's a huge concentration element of it. And then we jump into round 2, where it was Lindstrom from Sweden, and proved to be quite a tricky opponent, actually, in some of the exchanges in particular. And we've seen this from a lot of the Swedish, where the angular movement and the ability to pick a line has been very, very good from some of the Swedes.
Yeah, definitely. Like, at the start of this, I thought, okay, like when they came out the blocks, it was like, okay, Sam is going to be in control in this one. I think she had the ring position, she was controlling the distance, but Sweden was finding very tricky kind of angles, like you said, and her blitz was actually quite effective. And I think that we see a couple of clips here that when she gets the blitz off the side kick, especially like this one, she got a fantastic return. I don't think the turning kick on the back foot is the best solution as a counter for hands. I think the side kick or back kick is a better option here, but still, Sweden was able to make good kind of exchanges for herself and get a couple of scores. I think Sam is very good at that jumping back fist initial. She kind of gives the perception of distance that's not there, and people kind of take it for granted.
But as I said, there's a good example again where Sweden has found a good line outside the front foot and left Sam in a bit of bother.
Yeah, but she makes that adjustment again in this one, where I just mentioned she tried to counter it with a turning kick before, and now she adjusted and countered the blitz with a side kick. So there we go again. The adjustments she makes in the fight are really, really good.
Absolutely. And yeah, you can see that, just making that quick change, putting it into the side kick, and then a really, really, really nice turn, and like the ring position. And this is very, very much like that very first exchange with the it's very unfortunate that there's a foul there, because like we looked at this earlier and we kind of said, no, there's not that much in this. She just picked a good angle, and the Swede has gotten caught with her legs crossed, and therefore kind of full facing going backwards, and it's like never a great place to be. But you're not going to not take the scores. Like, that's exactly where you want your opponent to be. You want them full facing on the back foot, as Sweden has almost done there to Sam in return. Like, you want your opponent full facing on the back foot, because then they can't effectively defend themselves. That's perfect.
And I think that actually Sam does something really well, and this is something that me and you have spoken about before, is the re-engagement of hands. So go to hands, create space, and go to hands again. And that can be a real effective tactic when your hands is getting kind of scrappy and it's very close. And we've seen loads of evidence of that there with Sam, where she was punching and it was very close, but then she makes the adjustment of engaging, coming back out and re-engaging. And then this here is a lovely one. She's cruising here 4-0. I think that this is very reminiscent of the likes of Milos and Daniel Diaula and some of the guys from Master Yedut's camp. So really nice counter style.
We jumped straight in there. I think I've skipped ahead, but jumping right away from there into the semi-final with Ciara from Ireland. And I think we saw there are some similarities in terms of what they do with their front leg, but I think Ciara, as we go through this whole battle, wanted to make this about the control of the space and the use of that front leg, whereas Sam was about encroaching on that space and getting the to be the first to hands over Ciara's front leg.
Yeah, definitely. So you can see that it starts off as a front leg fencing battle, and then they're trying to just see ways through. And I think that Ciara does a good job of sucking Sam in, but she tries to play on the edge a bit too much then. And I think Sam does a great job of squeezing to the edge. So although she doesn't really use her front leg for contact, look at the squeezing she's able to do and push people back. So she does a really good job here and actually gets a return on the scoreboard and brings it back. So I think right now it's going to be switching back again into a draw. So she does a good job of that squeezing of the space.
Yeah, there it is. And I think one of the things you'll see there is like where, you know, Sam has been in this division for a little while. Ciara has just moved up from 50. And I think there's that element of, I think Ciara has been used to being able to push out a bit more, you know, in her division and be a little bit more threatening off that front leg. Whereas I think it's the threat of the scores, the threat to Sam, rather than the power behind it necessarily at this stage. But then a really, really nice as an exchange and surprise from Ciara, you know, in terms of changing it up there. And something we've seen her do an awful lot as a junior and at the minus 50 division as well, is being able to bring in this backhand. And it's, you know, so clean.
And for me, can we just go back like 2 clips?
Yeah.
So for me, this is actually where this comes from. Look at this here. There's actually, it looks like there's nothing happening, but there's a micro battle happening here. Ciara's trying to control the center. Sam circles and comes back to the center. I think that's a very important point, because it looks like Ciara is trying to use her front leg to control, and even here. But now Sam is thinking, okay, and boom, Ciara just switches it up and breaks that pattern instantly. And it's obviously then she's not expecting that. So that's a very important point as well, that you kind of settle people into the rhythm that you have and the patterns that you have. Okay, this person wants to kick more, they want to keep space, and then all of a sudden Ciara just switches that up and catches her opponent by surprise. So an important point.
Yeah, and was able to bring it back to one flag game at that point.
Yeah, because I think, like, looking at that from the first round, Sam's intention here is to control, squeeze space, and then get the hands where she can. Where Ciara looks like she's trying to control long distance and trying to use her leg, which obviously means she's been squeezed to the corners. So then when she's able to switch that up, it's very effective. But Sam recognises that, I think, as well, and then she tries to adjust going into the next round. So this is just the end of the first round. Now we're coming into the second round.
But again, I think what we're looking at here, like for me, when you look at an exchange like we just had there, and you know, it's so often the issue with contact. You know, you go here and Ciara comes forward with her hands, and Sam meets her. So just after this, and Sam has no reaction to, like, there's no big visual reaction to this. Sam just goes, yeah, fine, I'll go and punch too. And when there's no reaction like that, the referees just go, oh, everything is fine. But the punches are just as hard. It's just that, you know, it's the reaction to the punches that's changing most of the time. So that's like one of the difficulties that we have in relation to contact, is that this could be holding, could be a foul elsewhere. Nope, carry on. And it's the same referee. Now, that isn't necessarily a critique of the referee. What I'm saying is the referees are human beings, and what they're seeing is, hey, this rule is really easy to kind of implement when you see a big visual reaction that you can go off of, and where the competitors just kind of get on with it. You know,
definitely. Yeah, and as we look here, this is towards the end of the match. If we could just rewind a little bit there, Adrian.
Yeah.
So it's like a great back and forth. Sam's just after getting a headshot, so now she's 3-1 up. I know Ciara needs to make a change somehow, but I think she goes for broke here in this next one and actually makes a mistake of trying to blitz from too far out.
Yeah, for sure.
Sam's just able to pick off that defensive psychic. So I think she's just a little bit overzealous there, Ciara, and trying to go for it too early. And I think there was still enough time on the clock. So I think she learned from that, and I think that might have been like the difference then in the end. But we still have a little sequence to go. But I think that was something that she will probably look back on. And a nice composure by Sam to be able to pick that moment and control the space. So we see, like, it's a switch now of what we talked about a while ago. Now it's like Ciara's trying to squeeze the space, obviously, because she's behind. So
I just wanted to flick back on that, because one of the things that we can see sometimes is, like, a referee could be going, oh, we go into this, and then there'll be a punch, and it'll be getting, well, hang on a second. But, you know, Ciara has just realised she's winded, is what's happened there, you know?
Yeah.
And it's like, it wasn't a contact issue. She just realised, oh, I've walked onto a psychic and I'm a bit winded. Give me a second. And, you know, sometimes you be careful that ends up being a foul for contact, which, no, not at all. So referee's done very well there, I think.
Definitely. And then Sam does well, just kind of closing out the match, trying to keep Ciara busy, trying to keep her honest with the reactions she's given to make sure that she doesn't get anything off. So, yeah, great match. I think for me, this was probably the closest one of the whole lot. So, could have easily been a final. Maybe another case for rankings and things like that. So,
yeah, you know, you'd love to have your, like, that escalating, you know, thing where your easiest matches are in round 1 and 2, and then it gets harder into your quarter semi-final. You know, everyone wants to see that. Like, that's how it's done in all the Disney sports movies, you know, and the Mighty Ducks and everything else. It gets harder as you go on and you meet the toughest team in the competition in the final. Obviously, you don't have them in the first round. It wouldn't work great for the movies if, you know, you have your nemesis in the first round and then it's over. So, you know, it's there's something that we want, that narrative, you know, of, you know, it getting progressively harder, and then the two big guns or the four big guns meet in the semis and the finals, you know.
Yeah. So that leads us on to the final then.
Absolutely.
So Sam versus Italy. So I think, like, starting off on this one, like, you can see there's a big height difference and reach that Sam has, and I think that when you couple that with the timing she has, especially off the front hand, it just turns this match into a bit of a mismatch.
Yeah.
Once she figured out, like, the first exchange was actually quite a close one, but then once Sam found out that, okay, I have the timing of the front hand and I have a big advantage of distance when I want to, then that was it. She was able to pick multiple scores off and get lots of warnings on the board as well for her.
And it's the maximizing of scores as well. So it's not getting in with the singles, it's getting in with, you know, the 2 points or finishing with the body shot. You know, that's really helping there. And this one was the foul, and it's really, really harsh because, like, Sam has momentum going forwards. You're going to end up with body contact. I think that's a harsh foul.
Yeah, and it's right now it's just a bit too easy for Sam off that front hand. It's like she's just kind of like training her timing and almost like kind of a bit of point fighting, because we're not getting much exchanges here. Once they initiate off the front hand, it's being stopped very quick.
Yeah, and that one I think is just a little bit of sloppiness.
Yeah, sometimes it's their fault, sometimes it's the referee stepping in, so you can't blame either. It's just the flow of this match isn't as constant as like we've seen with Ciara and the previous match. So
yeah,
I think it actually plays into Sam's favour really well, because she's able to just kind of play around and pick off the nice clean shots when she's 4-0 up. So she's cruising at this stage now. She's after scoring a lot of entries off the front hand back fist especially, and now she's just cruising, and I think that she's actually, when she's in this mode here, is when she really shows
really nice to watch. I just wanted to flag this one that, like, I think there's a very nice bit in, and we saw it from like Ziga Zigaransky and so on, but where the feint with the body movement before the downward kick, the front hand, everything aims low, and then the body comes up with the downward kick. It's very it's a very, very nice kind of feint movement that you know, I think she's used it very well there in maybe an easier situation, but with Ziga we saw that as well. Uses it very, very nicely. The eyes, the footwork, the hand, everything kind of suggests dropping into the stance, and then all of a sudden the shot is coming over the shoulder. So, you know, it's a nice little bit of signalling.
Yeah, very nice. This is a nice sequence here, very flowy. And to be fair, we have to give the referee credit here. He let this one go.
He did,
and let them flow through it. He didn't break up the contact. So it was funny. The girls were almost expecting that there was a break there, and that's obviously a result of competing a lot, because it's what referees do, not one particular referee. So obviously they were expecting a break and play and a headshot to come in, and they got that chance to continue through. So that's important.
Yeah, and I think we saw that from both sides, you know. So sometimes you see the people expect the break and someone goes, and that's the match swung, and then sometimes we'll see that, you know, the person continues and the referee comes in to make the break, and they're almost like, you know, whoa, you should have known there was going to be a break there. It's like, well, no. Obviously no referee is ever saying that to a competitor, but it's just sometimes it transpires like that you know, you get to feel like, no, I can keep going here. And sometimes it feels in the match like there would normally be a stop here, and then it continues. So yeah, it leads to some very interesting momentum swings. So, you know, we're always trying to train people to continue through and to look for those, but like, you have to also be attentive and hear the referee. But you know, it is something to train for.
Yeah, I think, like, overall compared to the division we seen last week, I think the refereeing here was a bit better, definitely overall, from both referees that we've seen on both rings. So I think that's important as well. We don't want to be going out as if we're slating a referee. We just want to highlight some of the points that are there, and I think that's an important thing for us to do as a community in ITF, because then it becomes a talking point and we can change things if necessary, and people can adjust and adapt to the rule set as well. So that's what it's all about, I think. I was only going to say, like, and there is that distinction between
was say the referee doing what they're meant to do, but us not liking the rule, and the referee applying the rule in, you know, either incorrectly or you know, maybe not applying it in the right context or something. So there's a distinction there where, you know, sometimes we don't like when the referees are overly liberal in applying the rules to the letter of the law and not letting the match flow. But the problem is actually the rule. Yeah. And sometimes it's the referee is applying the rule in a way that doesn't make sense, or they're applying it when it shouldn't apply to our thinking. Yeah. And both of those are quite different things. So, you know, tough hell job. But, you know, someone's got to do it, and the people who do it have to hopefully get better at it. So, and regardless of how good you are, it's the same with us going forward with the athletes. The coaches have to do a better job every time. And I felt in that championships that, you know, even from the coach's point of view, we were rusty. You know, we weren't as used to reading things as quickly. You know, it was taking a little bit of time to get your coach's eye in and kind of, you know, start to see and the opportunities that were there, and sometimes they were occurring to you very late in the match, and you might have got it much earlier in the match with a little bit more on the mat experience. But as much as the competitors need that match time, the coaches need the match time, but so do the umpires, and they need multiple events to kind of get there, because if you're only working on a national level, most matches don't happen at the same speed or intensity. So you're kind of you're being snapped up to it. Whereas when you get to the, like, I think the refereeing probably improved from day 2 to day 3 to where it was somewhat better by the time you got to the team sparring. You know, just because they've had a couple of days to get, you know, zoned in on what the speed is and relax into it a bit.
But like we talked about as well, the concentration levels required and the mental capacity to do that. Obviously, as a referee, that's hard to do as well. You know, when you're there for multiple matches one after the other, to be able to concentrate and pick the right decision every single time is not easy. So yeah, we have to make that point as well. Is that
for sure?
Usually it's the people who are watching are kind of almost saying, "Oh, we're not happy with this," like you said. But sometimes it's almost like don't shoot the messenger kind of a thing. So yeah, they have a tough job.
For sure. So
what's your takeaways there from Sam, Adrian? What are you impressed with watching that? Some of her fights?
Do you know what? I like her ability to control her distance and rhythm particularly well. I think she imposes herself on the match really nicely, regardless of the opponent. And in doing that, I think she just controls her controllables very well. She controls the space between her and her opponent. She very rarely concedes the centre for any major amount of time. Like, she tends to always have an eye towards where she needs to be next. But for me, the biggest single takeaway that I'd be impressed with is her ability to judge the game state and make an adjustment, drop of a hat. And in particular, when it doesn't matter that it's something has gone well or something that's gone poorly, that she straight away just has a quick look, shrugs, and then she's into what she needs to do for the next bit. And I think that's a lot of maturity and composure. I think that's very impressive. And
definitely,
you?
like some people think that like it's a special technique or something like that, but when it's close, the likes of Ciara here and Sam in the semi-final, for example, when there's not much between the two, that's the difference. I think is the decision making under pressure, and that's the important thing. Some people think, oh, she has this good technique or she does this really well, but it's that kind of decision making, like we just mentioned there, about the game state. You're up, you're down, you're adjusting. I think they're the skills that people take for granted a lot, and they're the difference between the people on the top step of the podium and maybe not getting the medal or on third place, whatever.
Absolutely. So we have a couple of weeks left to Christmas, so we'll definitely look to squeeze in 1 or 2 more reviews from the European Championships. And if people do have a preference for which fighter you'd like to follow all the way to the final and see how they did, please let us know, and we might bump them up the running order. But you know, there were so many really good finalists and impressive fighters who did a great job to get back to the final and to win in the first Euros back after COVID. And it definitely would be great to narrate their story and see how they did in all of their matches. So
definitely,
until next Friday.
Yeah, we'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching. If you made it this far, fair play to you. Catch you next week.
Bye now.